Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue our learning photography from the beginning. I've been kind of waffling over which way to go here. I don't know if I want to jump completely into the exposure triangle or jump into a little bit with the exposure triangle and go ahead and get you shooting some pictures. And if you're like me, I'm a little impatient, so I thought, let's do it. Let's do a little bit of the exposure triangle, and let's go ahead and jump in and start shooting some pictures. That way you can see the images you're getting, and once we jump into the exposure triangle fully, it'll start making sense to you on why it didn't look good, or whatever the case may be with your picture, how you can change it. So if you look on top of your camera, you'll see things that say like AV, which is aperture priority in Canon, TV is shutter priority for Canon, and P is program. That's where your camera pretty much does everything. And then M, which is manual, which we'll get to down the road. So don't worry about manual right now. What I want to try to explain is I want to give you a little bit of an idea. Hey guys, I just want to take this second of your time. If you guys would please hit like and subscribe, it would go a long ways toward helping our channel and help us keep making these videos. Thank you. Like, say if you were to set your camera in program, because you say, well, if program will do everything for me, why don't I just shoot everything in program? And you can shoot everything in program, but what happens is there are three things. ISO, which is this light sensitivity, how sensitive light is to your sensor. Your shutter speed, which is how fast it opens and closes the aperture, which is the hole in the lens. And then the aperture, which determines the size of the hole in the lens, which determines what's in focus in the front and what's in focus in the back. That's your creativity. Your program will get you a picture. Once you get into the other aspects of learning how to balance the shutter triangle, that's where your creative photos are going to come in. So like if you want a car that's stopped in action, or if you want a picture of a pretty rose with everything blurred behind it, or if you're shooting photos of your wife or your girlfriend, you want to focus on the eyes and have the background behind her out of focus. Or let's say you're somewhere that's beautiful and you want the image in the background in focus, but you still want her in focus. So, I'm sorry, you would raise your aperture from say 1.8, which is a lot of light coming in, up to maybe f8. That way you've got her in focus and what's behind her in focus. So it all works together with this triangle. If you move one, you have to move another to keep it all in line once you get that good exposure. One of the settings I want to start you with is called shutter priority. Now on Canon, it's called the TV mode. Don't know why, always has been that way, but TV stands for shutter priority. Well, in that case, let's say you're outside and there's some cars going by and you want to stop the action on those cars. Well, when you're on shutter priority, dial your shutter speed up to 1/1000th of a second. And now you're going to see all these shutter speeds that are listed. It'll say 1,000. Well, that's 1/1000th of a second. So your shutter is going to open and close in 1/1000th of a second, which is fast. Then you'll have 1/500th of a second, and down to 1/60th of a second, down to 1/30th of a second, down to half a second, on up to leaving it open for 30 seconds, which you would need to set it on tripod. But we're just getting started, so we're going to go easy here. So if you have a tripod and you're near a road, or if you've got somebody in the family who likes to run, anything that's moving fast, and to go to shutter priority, I'm going to use cars in this example. I don't want you to get too close to a road. You know how crazy people are nowadays, but if you can get near, where you can see cars going by, take your camera. You can hand hold it. You don't even have to have a tripod for this. Put it on 1/500th of a second. Let the camera set everything else. Take the picture, and you'll notice that the cars are completely frozen. And if they're not completely frozen at 1/500th of a second, if you're real close to them, or if they're going real fast, go up to 1/1000th of a second. That'll stop it in action. It'll be the same thing if a bird comes flying over. If a bird is flying over and you're shooting at 1/1000th of a second, you're pretty much going to get that frozen. It's going to look like it's stopped in time. It'll be an image in time that's just completely stopped. Now, these settings I'm telling you about, they're variable. A lot of cameras will go up to 1/4000th of a second, want to go up to 1/8000th. Some will go even higher. But you do have to have enough light to be able to get to these settings. You can't just go outside and it's almost sunset, set your camera to 1/4000th of a second and start shooting away, because what the camera will do, it will need more light. So it is going to raise your ISO. The sensitivity to the light on your sensor is going to capture more light being sensitive. And you're going to think, well, why can't I just set that as high as it'll go and get as much light as I can? Well, the reason you can't do that is because with ISO, the higher you go, the more grain or noise you're going to get in your image. So you always want to keep your ISO as low as possible to keep from getting grain. It's a balancing act in the exposure triangle. Now, the other setting is the f-stop or the aperture. Now, what it do, this is your creative setting. Let's say you've got a picture of a rose and you want a picture of the rose, so you back up, just a couple feet. So you got your 50mm lens on there and you dial, you can go into aperture priority which is AV on Canon. Go to Aperture Priority, dial your aperture down as low as it go, which would be 1.8, 2.8, somewhere in there. The smaller the number, the more light it's going to let in. I know that's backwards, but the smaller the number, the more light it's going to let in. So let's say you've got a 50 millimeter 1.8. I mentioned that the other day when I was talking about getting equipment if you didn't have it. So let's say you get 2 feet away from your flower, you focus on the flower, and you're at 1.8, the camera sets everything else. And when you're done, you're going to notice you've got a sharp flower in focus, and everything behind the flower is going to be out of focus. That's called bokeh or depth of field. It's called very shallow. Now, if there's something behind that flower that you want to show, you can turn you could turn your aperture up to say 5, 6, or 8, and then you'll get more in focus behind the flower. Now, you're also affected by how close you are to the flower. If you're as close as you can get to the flower in focus, you may have to adjust your f-stop to get more in focus behind it. So distance has to play into that too, but go outside and practice that. It don't have to be a flower. It can be anything it could be a fence post. You know, you can just take pictures of a fence post, go out there and shut it on Aperture Priority, set it on 1.8 or however low your lens goes, stay on the same shot, shoot it at 1.8, shoot it at 2.8, shoot it at f4, f8, f11, f16, come in and look at your camera and you'll see how it changes your background from almost nothing in focus to almost everything in focus. That's how you get creative. That's one of the ways you get creative is with your f-stop, which is done by you just controlling your aperture and aperture priority mode. There's so much to this, but this is just a way to help you get started. So I got 2 things I want you guys to do. I want you to set your camera on shutter priority. Get some cars going by. I want you to set that shutter speed up to about 1/1000th of a second. It'll need to be during the day so you have plenty of light. You'll notice that the car is frozen in action. Just boom, just stopped. You can probably read where it says Goodyear on the tires. Back in the days when we had white leather tires, you could stop. I went to a NASCAR race one time, and I think I had it on like 1/4000th of a second. It was up close, and they were going around the track, and you can read where it said Goodyear Eagle on the side of the tire because the shutter speed was up that high, so you can just freeze action. Well, you can also do the action a little bit different. If you want a little bit of blur in your picture, you can drop that shutter speed down just a little bit. Now, the reason you would want blur, it's a little more complicated. I'll get into more details into that down the road. But you can do a pan on cars. So you've seen the pictures at nighttime when the headlights and the taillights are red, and you'll see just a streak of lights. One's white and one's red. That's done through a slow shutter speed of probably 1/2 a second or 1 second, something like that, where you just move, you just click it and you keep your camera moving with the cars and you're just going to get a streak of light. That's not something I want you to really try to get into right now. It's a little more advanced. I want you to learn the basics of the shutter speed first. If you get a chance to shoot some birds that are maybe around your house right now, I know it's cold pretty much where it's kind of hard to get outside. Even here in Georgia, it's like 15 degrees tonight, so I'm not doing a lot outside. I had thought about going outside and getting some examples for you guys, and I like you guys a lot, but when it gets below 20 degrees, this Georgia boy doesn't find many reasons to go outside. So with that said, go with your shutter priority, shoot a few shots, see what you can do with it. And if you're having a problem, you're like, why is this not coming out right? He told me to do this, but it's just not working. Send me an email of your picture. Let me know what problem you're having. I'll look at the picture and I'll be able to tell you what happens, how you can change it and make it better. All this is free. This is free advice. And then your aperture priority, I want you to go in and find an object, maybe a candle. I know my wife has a trillion of them around the house. So get a few feet away from that candle. Set your aperture down as low as it'll go. If you got a 50 millimeter, it probably goes down to 1.8. Set it on 1.8. Focus on the candle. Shoot away. And look, you'll have the candle in sharp focus, and everything behind it will be blurry. Again, that's called depth of field. That's called a shallow depth of field, or nowadays a lot of people call it your bokeh. Now, your ISO, this is a whole nother beast. This is what makes your camera sensitive to light. So let's say you're shooting that candle picture I was just talking about, and it's fairly dark in the house. Well, if you got a new modern mirrorless camera, you can dial that thing up to 25,000 ISO and still get not a very grainy shot. You'll get a little bit of grain, but not much, and it'll still be a good looking picture. But if you're using an older digital SLR like a Canon 30D, you're not really able to go over about 800 without starting to see that grain. But here's the deal. You guys are just learning. So you're going to make mistakes. So let's go ahead and don't worry about messing up any pictures because you're just learning. You want to see what happens when you do this. So let's say, well, what happens when I take this shot to 1/60th of a second shutter speed? And what happens if I take it to 1/10th of a shutter speed? And what happens if I set my aperture on f/16? Well, go ahead and try it. I mean, you know, you're just playing around trying to figure out what things do. And if you're like me, I'm more visual. I have to be able to see it. Now, my wife, she can read a book, set it down, and she remembers every freaking thing she read. I can read a book, and 2 days later, I'll forget that I even read the book. So I'm much more of a hands-on person. I'm not much for that fancy book learning, as they used to say on the Beverly Hillbillies. But, but my wife, she's a genius at reading and understanding. I just don't have that kind of comprehension. And I think most photographers, we fall into the category of the hands-on kind of people. So when I was learning, I made more mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes. At least I do. So once I make a mistake, I go, okay, don't do that again. But if somebody wanted me to sit down and read the book, it would be over. There'd be no hope for me. So I have taken so many pictures over the last 40 years, and I'm still learning. There's still new stuff that comes out. This year, last year, February 1st was our first video, I think, that we put out. So I had to learn audio and video. That was a whole new game for me. And there was a lot of, I go back and look at some of our first videos. And I'm like, oh gosh, that's terrible. Should I just take those down? But it was the same way in photography. My wife, we met in the 10th grade and I worked at a 1-hour lab and we had a photography studio in there. And we had this cool white background. And I had an idea. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get her. Her name is Denise. I said, I'm going to get her in here, get some really cool pictures on this white background. So the owner of the studio had gone. He didn't care that I was using the background, but he wasn't there. It was just me. So it was just me setting it. I didn't have any help. So I set it up and I meted for her face and she looked excellent in the picture, but the background was green. And by green, I mean alien Martian green, even though it was perfectly white. Because I had not learned yet, I needed to light that background to get it white. All I had were lights on her. And she still has this poster to this day. I make her keep it in the closet because it's so bad. But it's a reminder to me of the lesson I had to learn. I had to learn how to light the background. And, some people just pick this kind of stuff up instantly. Some people have to practice it. Some people practice it a few times, they get it down pat. And there's so much into photography. Some of it's going to come easy to you. Some of it's going to come a little bit harder. I'm getting in touch with a couple of friends that kind of spread all over the world right now. They're photographers, been friends with them for a long time. I'm going to get them on the show if I can and just ask them, what was the hardest thing that you had to learn in photography? And what was the easiest thing? What did you pick up the easiest? And go from there. In my case, I was able to print pictures. I was printing before I learned how to shoot. So I got to see all the mistakes people were making, which kind of helped me, except unfortunately nobody ever shot any pictures on a white background and got a green one. So I had to kind of learn that on my own. But what you going to do? So something else you can do, if you want to take your shutter priority, take your wife or your girlfriend over to the window with sunlight coming in, focus on her eyes. You always, always, always focus on the person's eyes. If you've got eye tracking on your camera, use it. Put her by the window and put it on shutter priority. And if your lens is a 50 millimeter, set it on 1/60th of a second, let it pick everything else, and look how good that comes out. Now, if it doesn't come out that good, there may not be that much light coming in. You may can't really drop the shutter speed from there because you're hand holding with a 50 millimeter lens. As you go below 1/50th of a second, you'll probably get some camera shake, depending on many things like image stabilization, all this. We'll get all this down the road. But for now, that's the basics. If your lens is like a 50 millimeter, keep your ISO at 160 or higher. Now, I have broke these rules before, and you can break them too. Cameras have what's called image stabilization, and it helps you hold the camera still. Some cameras have it, some don't. Some lenses have it, and the cameras don't. Some cameras don't, and the lenses do, so you just never know. Take that, shoot the pictures. Now, the one thing about shutter priority that can be an issue, if you push the button, and you might be set at 1/500th of a second, but you see down at the bottom, your f-stop, your aperture is blinking. That means you don't have enough light. So from there, you're going to have to turn up your ISO. Turn it up until that light starts blinking. And for right now, don't worry about getting grain. If you have to shoot at 1600, 3200, 6400, whatever, especially being wintertime, shoot it. See what it looks like. Depending on your camera, will be how much grain you have. But experiment and play around. You're not going to mess anything up. You're just learning. So go ahead and make those mistakes and then learn to fix those mistakes. And the next time you go to shoot the picture, you go like, okay, last time I did this, I had this problem, so I need to do this to fix it. And once we get into the shutter triangle, you'll have much more of an understanding of what you do need to fix. So I plan on doing the shutter triangle probably next week on our series. I just wanted to go ahead and get you guys shooting pictures so it didn't get boring to you. Because like I said, just sitting around reading about stuff and hearing about stuff that you just can't like really put your hands on doesn't help me a lot. I'm a big hands-on person. I want to know what I'm doing, and I want to see what happens when I'm doing it. Now, if you're shooting along and you can tell on the back of your camera that absolutely nothing is looking good, go to Program. Shoot the pictures. You'll get an image. You may not be able to set the low aperture to get the blurry background, and you may not have a shutter speed high enough to stop the cars, but you will get an image. Once you get that image, you can look at those settings, and then once you learn the exposure triangle, you can take those settings and go, okay, well, I want a blurry background, so I need to take that f-stop aperture setting down from f8 to 2.8. So to do that, that is 2, 8, 4, 5, 6. That's 3 stops that you've got to change. So you've either got to raise your ISO 3 stops. So if you were at 400, you would go from 400 to 800 to 1600 to 3200. That's 3 stops difference. So if we went to 3200 and you were shooting, I believe I said f8, try that and see what you get. Just keep playing around. You know, it's no problem messing up, because the more you mess up, the more you'll learn how to correct later. That's how it was always with me. Now, when you're shooting these pictures, on the back of your camera, there's going to be an option. It's going to ask you if you want to shoot in JPEG or RAW. What I would like for you to do is shoot both. Shoot large JPEG, shoot large RAW. You may not have any idea what even a RAW image is right now, and that's completely fine, because what I want you to do is in a JPEG, the camera is processing the information, just like in the old days, you'd go shoot a roll of film, you'd go get it processed. Well, in JPEG, your camera is processing those colors, everything for you internally in the camera. A RAW, all it does is capture the raw data of the image. And once you get going and you get into Photoshop, you get to other cameras, they have what's called camera raw. And you may have like a 2-stop leeway to fix a picture in a JPEG, which is not very much if you're off. But a raw image, you may have 5 or 6 stops that you can go in and just make a beautiful picture from a picture that's 4 stops underexposed. So shooting in RAW, I highly suggest it, even if you don't know how to open it or even what it is. Just shoot it in RAW, because 6 months from now, you might come back to a picture and go, oh, I got that RAW picture that I liked. The JPEG didn't look so good. Let's see what I can do with that RAW image. And you'll be amazed at what you can do with the RAW image. We'll do videos on camera RAW and how to get into it and change the settings. Most all professional photographers shoot in RAW, because especially when you're shooting a wedding or something like that, you want to be able to adjust to the best detail that you can possibly get in an image. You don't want to be stuck with your JPEG where, you know, if you're just a little bit off, you can't make it look good. So it will take up a little bit more room on your memory card, and they are a little slower to download, but just take them all, put them in a file, call them, 2024 RAW. Drop them all in there, unless you want to organize each category. That's up to you. But just get them all in a file so that you can find them one day and come back once you learn RAW, and you'll see an amazing difference between editing a JPEG picture and editing a RAW picture. Everything we shoot, I shoot RAW. No matter, heck, just for our family Christmas get together, I shoot RAW pictures, because I have a habit. I go in, I adjust them. I want them to look like I want them to look. It almost turns into, this is your style of photography. People can look, because everybody has a certain style. Everybody has a certain thing they like. My wife likes a little bit more yellow tint to the pictures, a little more warm. I lean to the magenta side. I like a little more magenta colors. And you can do all that in RAW. White balance, you've heard these terms. Don't worry about learning right now to set your camera on auto white balance. But once you get into RAW, you can adjust all that in there. And also the portrait settings that you see on the back of your camera, that they're set there. That's all for JPEGs. That is telling your camera how to process your film in JPEGs. It has no bearing when you shoot RAW. RAW only collects data. It doesn't matter what those settings are set on. If you're shooting RAW, RAW is just data that you will process at a later time. So just to give you a quick idea, the f-stop is the size of the opening in the lens. Can't really see it from here, but a very, very small opening on your lens is going to be like an f/22. When the lens is wide open, you're going to be at 1.8 or 2.8. Different cameras have different settings. It's called fast. If somebody says that's a fast lens, what that means is the camera goes down to 2.8 or 1.8 or 1.2, and you're going to pay a lot more for those kind of lenses. but they are worth it in the long run, especially if you're making money to an extent. Now, you might have a lens that's a 1.8 for $500, and the next one might be the same one that goes to 1.2, and it might be $3,000. Now, I would look at that because I do photography for a living. I would think probably I'm not going to make an extra $2,500 by getting that half a stop difference. So it's kind of up to you. And again, this is all stuff not to worry about right now. I'm just kind of on a rabbit trail talking about this kind of stuff. But as far as your lens, that is where your aperture is. That's where the hole, the size, the 1.8 to f32 is going to be. Wide open, you're going to have a gigantic hole in there. Shutter speed, where, starts at 1/160th of a second. Well, it doesn't start there. It starts at bulb. You can hold it down as long as you want, or then 30 seconds, but I would suggest starting at 1/60th of a second if you're hand holding it, all the way up to 4,000, 8,000, or however far your camera will go on the shutter speed. Then after you've got those two going, you've got your ISO to decide how sensitive to light it's going to be. So 3 things are going on. Your aperture opens up, the size of the hole, whatever it's going to be. Your shutter decides how long that hole is going to stay open. The ISO decides how sensitive that light is to the sensor that you just shot with your aperture and your shutter. Each one affects the other. Like I said, high ISO is going to bring more grain. Low aperture, low f-stop is going to give you a nice depth of field. Very shallow depth of field, so you have to make sure you're dead focused on what you're focused on, or it will be out of focus. And shutter speed is mostly for stopping action or slowing it down if you want to do time exposures. So there's so much that can be done in the creativity. So now, maybe that I've said all this, you understand why not just, if you have the question, why not just flip my camera on program? Well, that's why, because program will not help you get a nice, creative, beautiful shot. It'll get you an image. You'll be able to see, hey, there's Aunt Mary and she's at grandma's house. But it will not get you the creative images that you're looking for. I assume if you're watching this channel, you're wanting to make your pictures look as good as possible. So you need to know how to make your pictures look creative. So before you take the shot, think, what do I want to do with this picture? I go back to the rose again. Okay, if you got this rose, I want just this rose in the picture and everything else blurred out. Go to Aperture Priority, because Aperture controls what your depth of field is. Dial it to your lowest setting, which might be 1.8, 2.8, somewhere in there. They all vary. Focus, shoot it with that. You'll get the nice blurry background. If you're trying to stop cars that are coming by real fast, go to 1,000 or 2,000 on your shutter speed, on Shutter Priority. Click the button on that. So I want you to learn, practice, get a little bit creative. The object is to always get the correct exposure and know what you want to do with the picture beforehand. Right now, you guys are just starting, so you may not have too much of an idea because you're not out shooting weddings and that kind of stuff. At least if you're beginning, I hope you're not out shooting weddings. You don't need to be. There's so much that goes into that. But for portraits of people that you're learning, taking pictures of flowers, settings, birds, whatever the case may be, you can go a long ways with Shutter Priority and Aperture Priority to practice with. And like I've told you guys a million times, if you have problems with a picture that you just can't figure out, email me at the bottom. I'll take a look at it. I'll tell you what to do to it to fix it. It's absolutely free. There's no catch. And we will help you every step of the way. People trained me when I was starting, so I'm just wanting to return that favor to you guys. So, but you always need light in photography. Photography is all about light. And your ISO, your f-stop, and your shutter speed are what control the 3 ways light get into your camera. So that's it for this week. But hey, if you guys go shoot a few shots, like I said, go take some pictures of a flower or a candle and get that low f-stop, and then maybe get some cars or your son running or somebody driving by the house or somebody running up and down the road or whatever the case may be. Turn that shutter speed up high and freeze that action. And do that for this week. See what kind of pictures you get. And then next week, send them to me. I'll go over them. If you are okay with me putting them online, showing them on the screen, just let me know. I won't make fun of you. I won't give you a hard time. You're just a beginner, I understand. But that picture, me explaining what you did wrong, might help out another 1,000 people that did the same thing that just didn't send in the picture. But if you don't want me to show the picture, I won't do it. So, but I will still help you out. But hey, just let me know. And any questions you guys have, just let me know on the bottom. I'll be glad to answer all your emails. And I guess that'll wrap up for this week. We get out there and let's do some shooting. And let's see what we can do for helping you guys out. Hit that subscribe button. Y'all have a good day. Thank you. Hey guys, I just want to take this second of your time. If you guys would please hit like and subscribe, it would go a long ways toward helping our channel and help us keep making these videos. Thank you.